What do the minimalists think about the war in Ukraine?
Here's what I'll say. It doesn't matter what Ryan and I think about. Like, what are your beliefs? So what if I say, oh, it's great? What is that going to get you, right? Here's what it's going to do. You're going to say, oh, well, that's a weird stance to have. And now I disagree with you. Now I no longer approve of Josh or Ryan or both of you, right? I don't approve of TK. So I can turn this podcast off, or I can stop following. Or I want you to believe exactly like me. And so if Josh says, you know what, I think the war in Ukraine is awful. I think all wars are terrible, but especially this war in Ukraine. And that is my personal belief. I think all war is terrible.
Yeah.
I think all war is a byproduct of unenlightened people. No enlightened person would ever go to war. Now, that's not a very practical thing. There's not actionable, right? Well, if Putin were just to become more enlightened. I was driving here this morning, and there's a bike shop near my house. And there was this beautiful sort of bumper sticker. It was a window sign in the bike shop, and it said, "Fight Putin, ride a bike." And there's a whole world in those 5 words, right? Because it signals a few things. On the surface, it tells you like who they support or whatever, right? I support the current thing, right? But they do so in a playful, creative way that says, hey, here's my stance, but also like, here's something that you can do with your personal life. So you're not as dependent on oil or foreign countries or fossil fuels, et cetera, right? But then there's also some other thing that's part of that. And it's like, hey, enjoy this type of consumerism. We're going to use this war to sell you a bike. It is another spin, an uncharitable spin that I could put on that. Now, either way, I'm simply ascribing an intention onto them. Judgment is but a mirror, and I am now judging them. I'm holding up the mirror and saying, well, and even this, like say we were to take this clip from the private podcast, cut it out, put it up on YouTube. We don't run any ads, but think of how we could profit if we turned on the ads on our YouTube channel. Now we could profit from the war in Ukraine by putting up some sort of title. What do the minimalists think about the war in Ukraine?
Yeah.
And now we are running ads against it. We're making money off it. Or you could even argue, hey, we encourage people to sign up for our Patreon. We're doing this whole political clutter episode this week. And so we're doing a long form. And if we put up the right war in Ukraine title, now I'm using the war in Ukraine to sell you something. I don't want that. And so I'll tell you this, if this does end up, Jordan, being a standalone YouTube clip, don't sign up for our Patreon on the basis of this. There are much better reasons to do that, but certainly has nothing to do with the war in Ukraine. I will say this, though, as war being a byproduct of unenlightened people, the solution isn't for everyone to become enlightened. The solution, if there is one, is understanding. And what do I mean by that? So, yes, there is a war going on right now. In fact, there are 23 wars that have more than 1,000 deaths that are currently going on right now. And this is not some form of whataboutism. It's understanding that the media gives us salacious news in order to aggregate our eyeballs onto their television show, their newspaper, their website, so they can place ads in front of us. And so the more salacious, the more clickbaity the headline, the more ads they can serve up to us. So they use things like the war if and only if it gets your eyeballs onto it. Why aren't you hearing about the war in Darfur? Or what about South Sudan? Now, part of that's just because they're old and maybe there's a lack of nuclear weapons.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the biggest reason you're not hearing about it, the only reason you're not hearing about it, is it doesn't get eyeballs onto their product. Because if the war in South Sudan got eyeballs onto the New York Times, they would lead with that every single day. It'd be above the fold. It'd be front page. It would be on the website, first thing you saw. Because then they could serve more advertisements to you. So understand that sometimes the reason that we're paying attention to whatever we're paying attention to is because it serves someone else. It's not serving us.
Yeah, like what we call the news is a matter of curation. Like every single day, there are more people who like get murdered or come up missing or die to a tragic accident than we literally have the time to talk about. And so what makes the news? of all the people who die, of all the people who go missing, who get murdered, who suffer, what determines the people that we talk about on the news? Well, what's good for business? Who's going to be more interesting? Who's going to generate the more clicks? And it's such a dangerous thing to define what it means to be informed based on someone else's process of profit-driven curation. We have to be a part of the news by finding our own sources of information that allow us to say, I'm going to study the world and understand the place that I live in according to the things that I think are important. Right? Like, lots of people died today. We can't talk about them all. Which ones do I want to focus on? And do I want to focus on any today? But that's really hard. Terrence McKenna has this excellent clip. I encourage everybody to watch it on YouTube. Maybe we can share in the links. It's called Create Your Own Roadshow. He's like, turn off the television, close the magazines, forget about NPR, forget about the newspaper, create your own show, your own roadshow. What are your hopes? What are your fears? What are your dreams? Your orgasms? All of those types of things, right? What's going on in your world and what matters to you? Oh, but that's selfish. And when people say that, what that really means is like, I don't like you focusing on what's important to you. I want you to stop being selfish and focus on what's important to me.
Which is the most selfish thing. I need you to contort your worldview to adhere to mine.
Yeah.
Ryan, what are your orgasms?
So many different things. Oh man, I think people, they worry about the war, they worry about voting. A lot of it's out of fear. Like, I'm certainly fearful of a nuclear attack. I mean, that's why I started paying attention to the war. But yeah, I mean, war is bad in general. Like, I feel compassion for anybody who's like suffering during this war. But it's interesting because we're lucky. I don't even know if I call it a privilege, because privilege, the only reason the only way you can get to that word and put that label on someone is if you're comparing them to someone else. So if you're not comparing, then there really is, things just are. It's not good or bad. It's not a privilege or not a privilege. It just is. But in this country, you could call it a privilege, I guess. But we have the ability to not be oppressed as other countries. And because there's this lack of oppression, we have this free will, this free reign that allow us to care about the dumbest things. I'm not calling the war dumb. I'm not calling about, I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about the things that come up in the media. It's like some of these things really don't matter at all, but they only matter to us because we don't have bigger problems than these little things, these little problems that we make a big deal about. And I think that, for me, is important to recognize that, like, yeah, I might get mad over a certain issue. Like, I really don't want to bring anything up because I don't want to distract from our conversation. But you
don't want to clutter it with with political clutter.
Exactly. But there might be an issue that comes up and I'm like, oh, I can't believe that person said that thing, or they're promoting this and they should be promoting that. And then, but I have to take a step back and be like, wow, like, I'm really lucky to care about this,
Yeah, and not only do all three of us have different political beliefs or non-beliefs, right? But we also have different religious beliefs. And so I'm going to turn to TK for a second here. My favorite Bible verse is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Yeah.
And that has helped me so many times. If someone gets outraged at me for something that I've done or said, sometimes I don't know what I've been doing for sure, right? But when they have a reaction that doesn't really comport onto reality, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They're treating me a particular way. If they're lashing out in anger or fear or whatever it might be. But what's the serenity prayer? Can you walk me through that? Because I have an exercise I want to walk the listener through.
Oh man, I don't know if I have it if I can directly quote it. It's kind of a paraphrase, but it's something to the effect of, grant me the
serenity
to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can,
and
the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah. And so here's the way that I look at news, whether it's the war in Ukraine or it is an article about Kylie Jenner, right? Take a piece of paper, make a list of everything that you're worried about. The war, the starvation, whatever it is.
The bathrooms people are using.
Yes. Everything that you're worried about, an entire list. And then go in and apply the serenity prayer to it. Cross off everything that's outside of your control. And then focus on the things that are in your control. So to recap, take a piece of paper, write down everything that you're worried about. The wars, the celebrity gossip, what you're going to have for dinner, everything you're worried about. Cross out the things now that are outside of your control. And then focus on the things that are in your control. We have a question here
today.
Can
I add something to that real quick?
Yeah.
Malcolm X says, of all our studies, history most rewards our research. I think there is great value in consuming things that were not created in your lifetime because it gives you a different sense of time and a broader sense of perspective about the world that you live in. One of the things we underestimate about attention today is that our concept of what is important is so easily manipulated. It literally changes every day. And our concept of what we need to pay attention to is often based on what is screaming the loudest or what is shining the brightest. And we have so little control over what's screaming the loudest and what's shining the brightest. And it's very difficult in the moment to be able to evaluate the things that are being talked about in terms of big history, right? Will this matter in 10 years? Will this even matter in 10 minutes? Think about all the things that perhaps we felt a lot of emotions about a year ago that we never talk about anymore. When you study history, it improves your ability to get a feel for the things that stand the test of time. Because when you look at history, there were lots of day-to-day fads and day-to-day trends that just got buried in irrelevance, but there were other broader themes and issues and questions and problems that just never went away or that had a bigger impact on society. And so I think history is so important. And so when you make a list of things like, all right, Kylie Jenner or, the Johnny Depp case, or any of that kind of stuff. It's like, all right, add to that list something that has nothing to do with your lifetime. It can be William Shakespeare, James Baldwin. Right? It can be anything that just didn't happen in your lifetime. And ask yourself, why are the first two things on that list more worthy to be called news or important than the last couple of things on that list? Merely because they're happening now? Merely because they're being talked about today? If that's your answer, then you might be suffering from recency bias. You might be suffering from manipulation of people who are experts, people who are the best in the world at getting you to click on something rather than something that preceded those people's very existence. I think history is a great antidote.
Did you enjoy this standalone Patreon highlight? If so, you can listen to full episodes of the Minimalist Private Podcast, available exclusively on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/theminimalists or click the link in the description. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free.